thank you for joining us. My name's Cara McFarlane and I work with Oxford University Press. And I'm really pleased to introduce today that we've got Tara Dodson with us, who's going to talk you through how ELS supports SEND pupils. We're also really fortunate that we're going to have a panel for the second half of the session as well, with some teachers who actually are teaching this and using it and able to share things that work well for them. So I will pass you over to Tara. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Tara. I'm one of the authors of ELS. So I wrote ELS. My writing partner, can you hear me? Yeah, okay. I wrote ELS with my writing partner, Katie, and just a little bit of a background of where it came from was that, so I am a parent of a SEND child, and I have a child who's in reception this year, so I feel like I have at the moment, quite a unique viewpoint on what education is like for children who have been in lockdown for their formative years, going into reception now, and as a parent of a SEND child, watching his education not work for him, and him not being able to access what he can quite clearly access with the right tools. And that combined with lots of mine and Katie's experience, so we could see great things about phonics programs and things that made it a lot harder for children to engage with. So we started to write ELS. This is where it all came from, was just us wanting to support the teachers that we were helping to teach phonics in a clearer way for children. And so we started to develop ELS. We made it the essentials. It's supposed to be really easy to engage with for you as the teacher, but also for the children. I think this kind of sums it up quite well, that learning to read is not a simple procedure. We know that we have the most alphabetically complex language, which, if you've got a child that has any additional need or any barrier to learning, is going to make that an even harder journey for them. So when we created ELS, and you'll have to forgive me, I have the scrappiest notes on paper because I just didn't know what the setup was going to be like. So when we created it, we wanted to make this as easy as possible, not just for the teacher, but for the children, because at the end of the day, they've got the most difficult journey to go through. So ELS has some core principles. We want to make sure that every child can learn how to read. Now, we normally say that it's a whole class model, but as we're going to hear from some of our panelists today, that's not always appropriate in every single setting. So I've crossed that one out. So you can have a special dispensation not to use a whole class model if you need to not. But we have well-structured daily lesson plans. They are really simple. There are only 4 for the whole program. So it's really easy for you as a teacher to deliver the same information to the children in a really similar structure and format every day, so that you're not yourself overloaded cognitively thinking, what have I got to do next? There's consistent terminology. This is a non-negotiable. We want everybody to have the same language. We want to give our children the language to talk about what they're doing in the classroom, but equally we want to make sure that that language is then consistent. And so often parents and carers is the place where this part of the journey is more challenging, because you have to educate them as well about what you're doing and why. We've got consistent resources. We've got the repetition and reinforcement of learning. Regular and manageable sessions are catch-up. We use one-to-one intervention, and we have a built-in in the lesson intervention as well. So at the first point of contact, the children get that intervention from you as the class teacher. And then we've got the training that supports the program as well. So thinking about how we're supporting all of the learners in our classroom, we know that there is a lot to learn. We know that language is really complex, and particularly for some children, language is the first hurdle that they're going over when they come to school, is actually being able to engage in the classroom through language. So we've tried to make everything as simple as possible for the children once they're then in that lesson. So it is complicated, so we have stripped it back to its essentials, where the name came from. We're giving all children the same opportunities in every lesson. We have specific vocabulary so that the children know what it is that you want them to do, what it is that they need to do, and how they're going to move forward. And we have opportunities for peer-to-peer sharing within the lesson, opportunities to have things modeled to them so that they can then repeat that model so that they get that sense of success, opportunities to share their own thinking, and then to have that support from an adult where needed within the lesson, and then get to share what they've then successfully done with their peers. It is really simple. It is consistent. Some might say repetitive, but that's the idea. The clear expectations at every point of the lesson mean that for the children, they know what to expect, which makes it easier for them to engage. As an adult, when you're a first-class teacher, I'm sure you'll agree that the first few years you are going almost every day because you don't know what you're doing. You are overloaded cognitively all the time whilst you're trying to learn how to teach and learn the curriculum you've got to deliver and learn how to understand what your learners themselves are getting from your lessons. So we have made it really clear so that you can just enjoy being the teacher. There is a purpose, an input, an outcome for every single part of the lesson, which is clearly explained in our training, so you know what you're looking for. So that you can then be predicting what you need to do next for all your children, but equally for them it's predictable. It's a secure environment. There is simple and direct application, so that you show them how to be successful, and then the children are given the opportunity to be successful independently. And like I said before, if they're not ready to go and do that independently, you do have that in the lesson intervention where you can then be supporting them. We keep everything simple on our slides, same as in our lesson plans, because we know that high-load environments make it more challenging for pupils to engage with the content that they are then seeing, or even engage with the person who's delivering that content. I went to school the other day. It was a very interesting visit. The classroom walls were decorated to within an inch of their lives. Now, I'm an adult. It took me about 24 hours before I then thought about what had I actually heard the people in the room saying, because it had taken me so long to process what I'd seen in the classrooms to then actually think, right, what did I actually see the teachers doing? What did I see the children doing? And I'm an adult walking into environments, and I'm in the, my job now means that I go to lots of different schools all the time, and it is still astonishing, even though I know I'm doing it, how quickly I can lose focus if there's something very pretty on the wall next to where the teacher is talking, because I'm getting distracted, and that's what the children are doing too. If you lose them, then it's really hard to get them back. Particularly children who are finding it harder to learn, or have a barrier or something that's going on for them that's going to make it harder to engage with what you're trying to deliver. If you lose them, sometimes that's it for the whole lesson, they're gone. So by keeping it simple and snappy and repetitive and predictable, you are less likely to lose their engagement because they know what it is you want them to do, and you can then have that pace within your lesson. So the visual layout of ELS, we keep everything clean. There is text space. There is repetition of simple artworks. You see them in the lessons, on the slides, on the flashcards, on the wall frieze, in their apply activities, and then very similar drawings. Sometimes in the essential blending books, you see some of those same images as well. So the children know what they're seeing. They know how to use that image to support their understanding. And equally, as a teacher for you, you've got that so that you can then support their vocabulary understanding as well. The slides look the same at each point of the lesson as a deliberate design. It's very difficult to make something simple, to make something where you are only putting the specific part that you're focusing on in front of the children. So that's why only that information that the children actually need to engage with has been included at each point. There is nothing extraneous. We have deliberately kept it as simple as possible. You've got word cards that can be printed to match the lesson, so if your children struggle to look at the screen, you can have those as an alternative, and they match the words that are in the content that's all planned for you, so you can use those in the classroom. We have a variety of ways that we use those. Some of our children use them on the carpet, and if they have a one-to-one or an LSO or a TA near them, they might be supporting them to decode and blend using those words on the carpet, but equally later on in the day, if you've got children who need that repetition outside of the lesson, we've got the same words. We're not giving you something new that you're not prepared for, we're giving you something that you know how to be successful with, and then we can have another go at doing it again together. You can use a color overlay on Chrome. It's a little patch that you can add on, and that will allow you to add a colored filter to your lesson. So we've got a white background, but you can then add your own filter to it to make it appropriate for your children in your classroom. And we've also got those large format wall frieze and the flashcards. So these are the printable word cards that you can use. If you're using ELS in your school, they're under the Send filter on Oxford Owl. They're there for every single day of teaching. They're all of the 8 words, or where it's the pseudo words on a review lesson, you've got the 12 words there that you can print off, and they match what the children are going to be seeing on the screen. So if you're not teaching the child with the screen, if you've had to set it up in an alternative way for the child that you're working with, then you've got these there to support you. And just an example here of how we have our teach side where we've given the child the sound, we've given them the rhyme, and now we're giving them words that include that sound. So at no point am I testing a child on something they have not yet been taught. It's that if you've taught reception and you've said, can you tell me a word with this sound in? And some of the children put their hands up and other children go, I don't know what you're talking about. We've removed that. We are giving the children the language and the vocabulary and the knowledge so that then they can say, I now know 3 words that have this sound in. And I know what they mean because you've given me a visual representation as well. And here, I've just put a filter over using that color overlay so you can just see how that works just to filter the backgrounds of the slides. And that's just, as I said, it's a plugin that you can use on Chrome. So how does it support the reduction of cognitive load? It's a bit of a buzzword, isn't it, cognitive load? We talk about it all the time. How are we going to make sure that every person in our classroom is getting exactly what they need from our lessons? And so to make it as easy as possible to engage, we have given the slides with only key information. The routines are consistent. There is very, very little change. The only changes are when we have a review lesson and we do something slightly different in that lesson because then we use a decodable book. And in year 1, when we're looking at the alternatives and we're stacking up what code we already know and how that aligns with what we're looking at now. So there's very few times that things change because we want it to be consistent for the children. There are different apply activities across the week, but there's very little change for them so that they know what to expect, how to be successful, and they get that success model. If you're continually failing at something, it's not a very attractive thing to go and do again on a daily basis. So it's an opportunity every day to be successful. There's plenty of opportunity for rehearsal. Within the lesson, we're rehearsing oral sentences, we're giving children our own examples, we're asking them to then generate theirs, we're listening in, we're remodeling, sorting those phrases out. If they've not given you a very well-worded sentence, you can then rephrase it for them. And then every child can have the opportunity to give their opinion to their peer, hear their peer's opinion, but then also hear from you as the teacher and from somebody in their class, get the opportunity to hear that. So that constant rehearsal, that readying them to write. We've got images that are going to support our understanding, and they're everywhere throughout the program. And they're there to support the children getting that own schema. You know, if we're thinking about fluent readers and what it really means to be a fluent reader, I need to have a really good understanding of context, background, information before I can really understand what it is that I'm reading. And I'd argue that a fluent reader, you're looking in Key Stage 2, a child who sounds like they're talking in their own voice because they understand what they're talking about. If you don't have any background knowledge, you don't have the vocabulary, you're not going to be able to do that. So it's about giving the children at every chance, every opportunity, particularly those children for whom language is more challenging, the vocabulary to talk about the world around us, but equally to talk about the things that we are then looking at within our other lessons, which is why the vocabulary and the images that are in the program have been very carefully selected because we know that they're supporting the wider curriculum as well. Repetition, it's in there because we want to make sure that that working memory and that long-term memory, that we're making that transition. So we're giving that opportunity to recall that information, stack it up so that we're ready to take it into our long-term memory for the children. And we review our GPCs, we review our harder to read and spell words throughout the program as well, so we're supporting, again, that transition to long-term memory. And there's a really clear focus. You know, if you take one thing away from anything, is that the teaching is the most important part, the thing you've got to actually teach the children. So that's where the biggest focus is for us in our lessons, is on the teach, the bit that you actually need to communicate to them. So we provide support for all of our pupils because not only do we have this really simple structure, and you're going to hear from our panel who are all using ELS in their own ways, in their own schools, and they're very different, there are different stories, but it's very simple for children to engage with. The first intervention is delivered in the lesson by the teacher. That means that you as the expert in that room gets to communicate to the child that needs your support the most the next thing. And it's a different version of what's already happened in the lesson. It's nothing new, it doesn't change. It's the focus on that GPC knowledge for the child, and you get to support them with consolidating that understanding if they're not ready to go and be apply independently. And then there are the interventions that support outside of the lesson as well. They're very short, they're one-to-one. There's a reason why they're one-to-one, because we are working on the processing of sound, those phonemes to GPCs, and we want them to be targeted to that child. It needs to be specific to that learner. For some children, they need to hear you, just in a quiet environment, saying those things again to them so that they can then hear those sounds to be able to reliably repeat and make those sounds themselves. So it's been very carefully thought about in terms of how to support those learners as well, what they need in the classroom, but then outside of the classroom. And that's why they're short as well. So it's a short amount of time that they're needing to engage with you with, but equally it's a short amount of time you're pulling them out of their curriculum for. So our interventions are 3, 4, and 5 minutes long. We do have a special educational needs timetable where if you're working in a setting like we're going to hear about from Grace, that you may be slowing it down for some pupils to meet the needs of those pupils. And I'm going to show you what that looks like if you haven't seen it. Again, it's under the SEND filter on Oxford OWL in our Enable guidance. And it shows you how to adapt to slow the progression so that you're still then completing the program, the children are still moving forward, but it's going to support you to break apart that lesson so it's easier for them to access. You've got the Enable guidance. If you're wanting to segment the teaching into smaller sections, if you've got pupils that are struggling with concentration, it shows you how to break up the lesson and how many minutes each of those sections of the lesson should take. We've got non-verbal assessments. We've been using these for a while now in a range of settings. So for children who, I was talking to a school yesterday, they've got a little girl in year 1 who's autistic, and though she is verbal and can communicate, she finds the thought of sitting in front of the screen and being tested terrifying and can't engage. So they started using these for her, just that it removed the anxiety for her as a person, and they can now see more, more clearly what it is that she actually knows and what she can understand and how she can apply her understanding. So don't feel like your child has to be non-verbal to use that assessment. It's just an assessment that requires the child not to say anything. So think about the needs of your pupil as well when it comes to assessing, because what we want to do is understand what they know so that we can then best support them moving forward. And then we've got an editable sound mat, and Rachel, who's going to come and join me on the panel, is the brains behind that one. So this is what our slowed progression looks like. It shows you what to teach on each day. It links to the lesson that you can then open to use with your pupils and tells you which sections to use within the lesson. And it also on at the end of the grid, it tells you which book the children can then take home and read. And so we want to give our children our match decodables. We've used some of the simpler texts on this one so there's less load for the children in terms of the amount of content on the page, the imagery for the children when they're engaging in that text, so that it's as simple as possible for them to have the opportunity to make that application without having to worry about, oh gosh, this page is full of words, and that feels a little bit beyond me right now. So we've thought carefully about the texts that are available with the program as well. And then we've got new on the, there's a video that will show you how to use that in that mat that you just saw on the previous slide. So there's a little how-to guide for this as well that's on the Oxford OWL site. This is our SEND filter. I've just picked a couple of things here. There's lots of stuff under here. But so you've got editable sound mats here. Now you can use these in a variety of different ways. As I mentioned, my child is autistic, and if I showed him these doodly pictures here, he'd be like, what is this? He wants a real picture of the real thing. So for some children, it might be choosing a photo of a real object that's going to support them to be able to then use that. For some children, it might be that you're using, like I know Rachel's using the visual phonics. They've got the hand gestures that the children are going to be using. And for other children, it might be things like PECs or whatever it is that you're using in your setting that's supporting your child. You can then be having pictures here to support that are appropriate for your learner. And then you've got the Enable guidance there on the right-hand side. It talks you through how to slow it, how to segment the lesson up, when that might be appropriate, because it's not appropriate, as you'll hear, in every single setting. So how can you decide on the best way to support your children? Looking at the individual needs of your child is the most important thing. We're going to hear from people that, my panel, all have very different roles in the schools that they work in. And the beauty, I think, of listening to these guys is that you're going to hear about how the individual needs of a child can be supported in many different ways. So thinking about what that child needs, what provision do you have available, and how can you best deploy your staff to meet the needs of the child? And what I do try to say to schools when they ask me, oh, we're going to do this for one of our pupils because we think we need it, often I say, like, I have provided you with a curriculum program. And what you have to do is actually teach the children in your classrooms. So the best person to decide what the individual needs of the child are is you. You know your children, you know your learners, you know what they need from you. So then it's about what What do we have available to make sure that that need is being met? A lot of what is already in the lessons doesn't need to be adapted. It might be that they just need it in a one-to-one environment. That might be what that child needs, or it might be that they just need it slowed down. But thinking about what the individual need of the child is. I watched a GPC recognition intervention the other day in a school. The intervention was delivered beautifully, but the child couldn't say any of the sounds. Actually, what the child needed was to practice saying sounds in a quiet environment where they could hear the adult and then practice making the shape of the mouth so that they could then say the sound correctly. So it's just thinking about what is the minute skill, right? This child doesn't know the GPC, but they don't know the GPC because they can't actually say the sound. So it's thinking into the minute detail of what is it that this kid needs from me. Oral blending. That's our building block for blending when we're reading words. I need to be able to orally blend so that I'm going to be able to blend the sounds together when I've said them out loud. So that's a skill I'm going to need first. Then I might need the GPC recognition. And then once I understand that that is the phoneme represented by this squiggle on the page that you've told me is writing, then I'm going to be able to access a blending for reading intervention to actually apply that understanding in a different way. So how quickly are they able to learn what you're trying to teach them? How quickly are they able to consolidate that? Do you need to deliver the intervention 2 days in a row? I suggest to Key Stage 2 teachers quite often that they do the GPC recognition intervention and sandwich on the blending for reading. So child gets that opportunity to apply without having to do the apply book. But you can do that intervention a few days in a row because in the handbook, Katie and I have written you a massive bank of words that are decodable for each GPC. So you can just go and get some words from there so you can change it up every day, but you can deliver that same information to them with new words to read, for example, in your interventions. So just thinking really carefully about what each child needs from you and how they're then going to be able to overcome or work with that information to best understand what you're trying to teach them. I think this is something that certainly Claire, who I work with and I talk about a lot, is the changing landscape in education. The thing that annoyed me about everybody having a problem with the toothbrushing is that I worked in a school where half my kids' teeth fell out because their parents didn't brush them at home. So I was thinking to myself, well, that's a great plan. I mean, I don't know where I'm going to fit it in the day, but it sounds like a wonderful idea because these kids couldn't speak because they didn't have any teeth. But so we're working in this ever-changing landscape. And as I said at the beginning, you know, I come with a different perspective, maybe that I wrote a phonics program. I have a child with special needs. I have a child who's learning to read at the moment in reception, and watching the different journey that they go on, particularly now thinking about, you know, I'm looking at my daughter and her peers, what the impact of lockdown is on those pupils now entering school. We were saying that some kids are turning up school with American accents because they have had less face-to-face interaction with their parents, because their parents have had to change their whole lives to cope with a global pandemic. And that's not something that's going to go away. That's a whole change in the way that we live in society. We've got lots more working from home, less face-to-face interactions, less modelling. You know, we consume a lot of content online. There's less modelling of this, what a book actually looks like, how you use it, how you engage with it. And thinking about what is it that those of us that have managed to instill in our children or in our classrooms or in our schools a love of reading and to model that reading. What is it that we're doing and how can we then share that with other people as well? But also thinking that the children that are coming into our rooms have had they've got a very different background than we might have had a few years ago. The National Literacy Trust stuff always makes me want to cry when I read all their statistics because they're terribly sad. 1 in 3 children are never going to hear a bedtime story. When I think that that's such an important bonding moment, which is why that story time being protected in your timetable, it's not just about that special interaction that you have with children. It is about giving that love of reading. It's that act of love for the child, but also it's about building that vocabulary and that understanding. We've got 10% increase in speech and language referrals. That was the last academic year. I don't know what it's going to be like this year. It's probably going to be even more than that. And we've got EHCPs not being funded. The SEM white paper that came out, I know Cara and I poured through that with our head in our hands at points. What we need to do is use the tools that we have in our classroom to support the needs of our children. And so that's why I have a little panel here with me, is so that we can talk about how we're using it in different ways. So that you can see that where adaptations are being made or whether it's being slowed down, the kind of profound need that those children have versus the children who are able to, with the right support, just have the program delivered as it stands. But this is what we're now coming up against. It's the children that are coming into our schools. We're looking at, I speak to lots and lots of teachers, and everybody is saying the same thing, that it is harder than it has been before. I went to a great talk earlier on about early language and literacy and reading, and thinking about particularly, and it's what I've said here, language and vocabulary knowledge is reduced. So that's what we talk about, a vocabulary-rich environment all the time, about giving children that opportunity. That's why there's pictures in the programme. That's why there's vocabulary planned in for you. That's why we say explain it to children. Don't just point and say this is what it is. Tell them what it is, explain it to them so that they can understand, and they can use those words themselves. They understand the meaning of that vocabulary, which is going to then further support, when they are reading in a more fluent manner, their understanding of what they're reading. But we've got to think about what we're now doing for those pupils that are coming in. So at this point, I'm going to invite my panel up to come and join me, so we can hear about the way that these guys are using ELS within their school. So I'm joined by Ray and Rachel and Laura. If you just want to say what the school is that you're teaching and what it's like, so that people kind of have an understanding.
So I'm a HLTA in a primary resource base. Currently we have 2 classes in our resource base, so we have 10 children in each class. All of those children have an EHCP, and their ages are from EYFS all the way through to year 2. They all have social, emotional communication needs and or autism.
And your aim for these pupils, what's your kind of long-term goal for them?
Initially, it's all based on listening and attention and engagement, and they all access phonics using ELS in a way that is specifically tailored towards them.
Fabulous, thank you. Rachel, do you want to?
My name is Rachel Fasakali. I'm a qualified teacher for deaf children and young people. I run a provision that's based within a mainstream school, so a provision that caters for deaf children who are fully included in a mainstream school but need additional support because they have significant language delay and need to catch up to peers. So it is possible for them to access ELS through me as well as within their mainstream classrooms.
Fab, thank you. And Laura.
Hi everyone, I'm Laura Spence. I'm the Director of Research and Development for the GLA. So we are a small trust of 9 primary schools in Gloucestershire. We have schools that range for small isolated village schools and inner city schools that are from areas of high deprivation. We're also in the process of setting up an EEF research school this year, which is really exciting as well.
Oh, yeah. I heard you guys talking about this just before, but why did you pick ELS? What was it that?
Shall I start?
Because we've all talked about it's very expensive, right? Everything's very expensive. No one's got any money. ELS is a good for your buck. You get quite a lot of bang, but we wanted to talk about why we actually picked it.
Okay, so that's a really good question. There's a number of reasons why we picked it. So before we took on ELS, we had our own programme that we designed called Sound Families. And actually, we were roughly in line with national average for phonics screening checks year on year. We were doing okay. But we always like to kind of keep our eyes open and look externally and see if there are better things out there for our children. And what our own programme wasn't doing is it wasn't having a big enough impact on our PP children and our SEND children. So that was our main driver to look into the accredited programmes. And we looked into all of them. We spent around 9 months exploring all of the programmes, met with all the providers, looked at all the resources, also did meet with schools that had implemented those particular programmes, and I think that's a really important thing to do, is to meet with the schools. And there were 3 main reasons for us that ELS was the one that we decided on. So first of all, cognitive load for our children. We felt that actually, from gathering our pupil voice, lots of our children found that our Sound Families approach, and possibly some of the other approaches we looked at as well, were very interactive, very bright, very colourful, but actually too much for our children, and it distracted from the key learning, which was actually to learn to read. Another element for us that we really liked the pedagogy around ELS, so the fact that it's teach, don't test, I think was perfect for us and for our teachers, and we use that now across the whole of our curriculum. I know that when I first qualified as an ELS teacher, an EYFS teacher, I would often say to the children, so what do we know that begins with the S sound? And then we'd have around 3 or 4 minutes where I'd have lots of things shouted at me like cat, cat, donkey, biscuit, before I then reined it back into actually what I was asking the children to do. And I look back now and I realise the common sense behind the fact that actually we need to teach these children. They don't necessarily have that knowledge, so it's our role to give it to them. So ELS for us absolutely works, and we do that across all of our curriculum now, the Teach, Don't Test. And most importantly for us, it was a whole school programme, a whole class programme. So actually, we have children that come to us from really disadvantaged backgrounds, SEND, but we didn't want to put a ceiling on their learning. And we've always taught a whole class, and ELS allows us to do that. And we've recently had a pupil that's joined us from another school that had another programme, another phonics programme. He's in year 2. He only knows his phase 3 sounds, and he knows them perfectly. He's not got a single gap, but he's never been exposed to phase 5. And within a few weeks of being in our school now, he's using phase 5 sounds as well as his phase 3, and he's applying those sounds. So for me, it's about not putting a ceiling on the children's learning.
Thank you.
So I'm quite fortunate in that although I worked for the local authority, the Cambridgeshire County Council, the mainstream school were looking at what phonics programme were we going to replace ours with, and in exactly the same position, we had a phonics programme that was written by our head teacher, included PowerPoint slides. It was a really well put together phonics programme, but likewise in terms of supporting our highest need SEND children, it didn't quite meet what we wanted it to do. We had included in our original programme things like visual phonics to support deaf children's learning, so it was really important to us that the scheme were open to the adaptations that we wanted to be able to make for the children. So we looked at a lot of schemes over a year and debated all of the things, and ultimately what Tara says about the simplicity, the clarity, the consistency, the repetition, these things are all so important to deaf children, and they are built into the programme as is. So for us, that has been incredible, and yeah, thank you.
Well, because we're linked to a mainstream school, it wasn't actually in our control, the fact that we were going to use ELS. It was what the mainstream school were going to use. So what we wanted to do was we wanted to take that mainstream approach, and it's really important for us that some of our children are actually able to go into mainstream classes and access lessons and sessions within the mainstream school. So we wanted to teach the same scheme that they were going to be teaching in there, so that when our children go in and join a session, all of those slides and that language is really consistent, so that it's not an unfamiliar environment that we're sending them into. If we're using the same teaching slides, the same language, the same structure, the same routine, then when those children are ready to go into a mainstream school with their peers, all of that is familiar to them, and they haven't got that anxiety or that new learning or that cognitive overload of them having to learn a whole new structure and a whole new approach. So for us, it was really important to do exactly what the mainstream school were doing, but teach it and deliver it in a way that was appropriate for our children.
You've sort of started to talk about the next thing I was going to ask you, which is about how the routines are supportive. So I know that we've spent a long time talking over a period of time about what you're doing in your classroom, but do you want to talk about how the development of your routines, because you've obviously changed in the time that we've been chatting, how you're delivering it within your room. So do you want to talk a bit about how you've built those routines for your children and how they're different to the kind of main programme?
Yeah, so our very first lesson that we did, we actually tried to align it exactly with how the ELS prescribed. And actually we found that for our children, their engagement level was much shorter and their attention was much shorter than what was needed to access that initial lesson. And so what we did is, in conjunction with my teacher, she came up with this idea of using a visual timetable to structure that lesson, and that was a huge game changer for us. So we introduced a widget timetable to go with our lesson. So it starts with the flashcards, the robot arms, the drum roll, the new sound, and it's very, very structured and very, very rigid. And that really, really appealed to all of our children, especially with AS. It's so key that they know exactly what happens first, what comes next, how many steps they've got to go through to that lesson for it to be complete. And we found that over time, their engagement and their attention really stretched, and they can access almost a full ELS lesson all in one go. And it was so key, because those structures and those routines are exactly the same every day. And for our children, the safety and the routine of that is so key, because they don't have to learn a new activity every day, a new worksheet every day, a new different way of teaching something. All the ELS structures and routines are the same every day. So the only actual new piece of learning that they're having to access is the sound. So the main point of that really stands out. And looking at how we've been able to stretch that over time is our children were doing one sound per week, and we were ensuring a coverage of skill across the week. But now our children are at the point where their engagement is so high and they're so used to that routine that they're now able to do 2 sounds a week. And we've really been able to up the pace. And so the more we do that, the more progression we're going to see through the scheme.
And I think, like, going back to what you're saying about that new routine, that new game or activity or whatever, that was one of the biggest things that for Katie and I was a motivating factor in stripping it back in the way that we, as part of, is that as part of our jobs in supporting schools with phonics was that you would watch teachers deliver a beautifully engaging lesson where there'd be lots of lovely things going on and hopping over rivers and walking around the room, and then you go to the children, what did you learn? And the child would say, well, I did that. But what did you learn? And it's that, the learning, the actual teaching. We're trying to teach you how to read. It's really complicated. If I change things for you every day, what you've learned is a new game. You haven't learnt the GPC, the core focus of the lesson. So that's why we started to kind of think about, right, how can we draw it back to its essence? And that's where the name came from, was that we spent the entire time going, what's the essence? What's the purpose? How are we going to make sure we communicate that really clearly? And that, you know, that distraction of other stuff, the extraneous information, it's actually just a blocker.
Yeah.
It's like somebody saying to you, right, I'm going to teach you how to do a surgery, and then we're going to go outside and play a game, then we're going to go over there and do that, and here's a scalpel. But that's what we're asking our kids to do. It's that kind of level of complexity to them.
Yeah.
Supplementing resources. You've talked a little bit about what you guys do there. Rachel, what do you guys do? Do you supplement?
So one of the things that we wanted to look for was that how are we going to incorporate? So visual phonics by hand is an adaptation created by Babs Day. Lots of schools for the deaf and people working with deaf children would know visual phonics, and it's hand shaped. So for example, alongside a S sound, you have a S hand shape. And on our previous phonics materials, we had those hand shapes with a photograph of a member of staff alongside those phonics materials. And it was really important to us that our children could still see those on the materials that they were using when it came to writing or when it came to rehearsing sounds. So in liaison, I kind of showed what we previously had and what we'd like to look for, and that's where the editable sound mats have come from, is that actually we now have photographs of our staff sitting alongside the grapheme that we want them to learn and alongside that picture, so they are really embedding their learning.
And that can then be used in other ways as well, as I said earlier on. I know you don't massively change things up where in your schools, do you?
No, not really. We've added a few things. So one of the things that we find for our children, particularly our SEND children, is they still need to be accessing phonics well into Key Stage 2. And that's really important for those children. And often for those children, it's the visual cues that support. So for instance, we still do paired reading in Key Stage 2 for our children, which is an ELS approach. I would say around 50% of our Key Stage 2 children do that. And we do have a visual success criteria that we've created that support the children to understand what that looks like when you're doing paired reading successfully. I think that for us has been a game changer, because actually we used to have more silent reading activities, that kind of thing, in relation to children practicing their reading in Key Stage 2. And as we know, reading Alex Quigley, for instance, he talks about how silent reading makes your strong children stronger, but your weaker children weaker, because most of the time they're not actually practicing their reading. But paired reading has given our children that opportunity to have that daily practice of reading with somebody who's on a similar level to them, so that they're also feeling that self-esteem-wise they're feeling stronger, and they are practicing the reading, which has had really good impact, and it allows our adults to oversee that rather than finding the time to read one-to-one with every single one of those children every day, which can be a challenge.
How have you found the impact of ELS in your trust? Because you have that overarching view. So what are the outcomes? What's the impact been for you as a trust?
So in every school, it's had a really positive impact. I think if I'm thinking about SEND, again, I think there's 24% that we've seen an increase in our phonics screening check in comparison to last year when we didn't have ELS. In one particular school, we have seen a gain from 33% of the children passing the phonics screening check to 100% of the SEND children in that class passing a phonics screening check. And the classes are very similar. They're comparable. We've also seen in one of our schools with the most challenging demographics, we've seen a 54% increase in the pupil premium children passing the phonics screening check. So for us, it's been transformational.
Great. Thank you.
Say no more.
Rachel, you were talking about one of your pupils who you're working with for phonics screen.
So like I say, children that are coming in with a significant language delay into our reception cohort, and we're looking to close that gap to their peers as soon as possible. But alongside that, continuing to develop those literacy skills. So it really is amazing for us that we have children who are now passing the phonics screen in year one alongside their cohort through 2 years of really intensive work. It's really powerful. And likewise in the mainstream for our school, they have had really positive results.
Fab.
Well, I'm not going to talk about data, but I'm going to talk about the huge impact it's actually had on our children's learning as a whole. So the actual engagement level of all of our children has grown significantly. And I personally think that's down to the structure of our ELS lessons, because they're now able to actually access a lesson and follow it all the way through from the start to the finish without getting up halfway through and wandering off and having to be drawn back. Following that schedule has been essential for our children. And all of the language that goes with that, we've actually implemented in a lot of other lessons as well. So in the whole aspect of modelling and activity for them, exactly as you do in the ELS. But we use those skills now in our PE lessons. We say, my turn, then your turn, me, then you. In any kind of skills teaching that we do, it's me, then you. And those skills that we've taught them in the ELS lesson are actually being now transferred into other lessons as well. And our children are now able to access lessons within the mainstream school because they're now able to follow that phonics program, and they're able to read and access sounds and words. So they're able to go and join in classes in the mainstream school, which has been a huge part of why we do what we do, is to be able to give children the opportunities to go and sit with their peers and join in and actually fully access that. So for our children, it's been huge. We've seen their listening and attention in every session transformed. And actually, as a teacher and a practitioner, our confidence has grown immensely. I think for us, we rely on having that routine and that structure within those lessons. And once you become confident in how that lesson works and how that session is taught, then you can teach it with confidence and you can make those adaptations that's needed for your children, but still with the safety of that scheme behind you. So it's made us really confident in how we teach it.
Which is my next question. Thinking about success for staff, not like, the training is provided online. Before we were talking about how it just means you can access it whenever you want to, going over it with members of staff or having it as part of your induction process, and there being no kind of like time limitation on being able to access that. But yeah, for members of staff and the adults that you work with, how do you feel like that's had an impact for them in the kind of confidence?
Yeah, it's been huge. So before we had to, due to staffing, we had to teach as a whole class and we had to pitch it in one way. Whereas now we've got to the point where some of our children, actually all of our children in my class, we're able to teach them in groups. So it's specifically tailored to our children. So we're actually teaching 3 different phases. So which means I teach a couple of groups and my TA is going to teach a group as well. And so having access to all of that online training has been essential, because if you're only having sort of one TD day training for your staff, if you have teaching assistants that don't come to teacher training days, or you don't have all of your staff present, then actually being able to access all of the training sessions on the ELS website has been really key, because you can go back and you can revisit all of those teaching sessions. And also, if you're going to start doing an intervention with a group of children, being able to watch the online video of Tara and Katie teaching you how to teach that intervention or how to implement that intervention, that's been essential because you want to get it right and you want to teach it properly. So having access to all of that is amazing.
Rachel.
Yeah, I would echo exactly the same thing. I mean, every school has experienced the challenge around recruitment of TAs and maintaining training levels for staff that are constantly moving or to fill roles. And for us to be able to provide that training at the point of entry has been incredibly helpful, because then we're able to keep that consistency going for the children. As you say, we can dive on into the main training programs, and then as and when people are involved in delivering more specific interventions, they can look at the videos immediately prior and make sure they're delivering that exactly as it should be. So for us, it's enabled us to give a consistency that we've not had before.
And Laura, as a trust kind of level, so obviously your schools are all teaching it. How have you found that it's had an impact on like teacher confidence in delivering phonics? Or
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for us, the impact has been cultural as well. So where we're able to rewatch the videos together, sometimes that's as a whole school, sometimes that's as a year group, sometimes we've identified a particular need with a teacher or a TA where they need a bit more support, and we'll watch it in a kind of coaching, mentoring style approach. But actually, it has, for us as a trust, it's established a culture of learning together and revisiting learning. And I think that's been really, really powerful, because we just naturally are all coaching and mentoring one another all the time, referring to the videos that we've seen, what we might have picked up from that in comparison to somebody else, and how we might use it. And I have to say, it's a really affordable model as well. And I know in the current climate that does make a big difference. But for us, being able to access that training all the time has facilitated some really great discussions and that continuous improvement in our delivery as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm aware that we are at time. If you would like to ask any questions for the teacher panel, they're very kindly said that you can grab them and ask away. But thank you so much for coming. I hope this has been helpful. I will be around if you want to ask me anything. Permission to make adaptations, I might give it to you, you never know. But thank you very much. Have a great rest of your day, and thank you. Bye.